When I was a kid, for about a 10, 15-year period, my mother took in the laundry from my dad's high school for all the sports teams. My dad was a high school assistant principal and then principal. And no matter the sport, baseball, soccer, football, basketball, all of the teams would throw all of their dirty uniforms after a game into bags, and we would bring them home, and my mother would wash them, scrubbing out all the grass stains and making them perfect again before the next game. It was tedious and dirty and smelly, and it was just something that was a part of our lives, walking down into the basement where my mom's washer and dryer were and just seeing all those uniforms hanging all the time. Well, one time when I was in the equivalent of first year, a 7th grader at home, it was sometime in November because it was already dark out when I was finishing my paper route. It was cold and snowy and the wind was biting, and I couldn't wait to get home. And I had finished delivering all my papers, walked in the back door, took off my coat, was going through the kitchen, and my dad said, "Don't get comfortable yet. There's bags of laundry in the trunk of the car. Go get them, bring them to the basement." I was livid. I was irate. Didn't they appreciate me, all that I'd already done, walking those almost 30 minutes of a paper route? And I stomped out and went to the car and pulled out these giant bags of laundry, and I was really going to show them how upset I was. So we had an outdoor hatch to go down to the basement, and I stomped my way down the stairs to make sure they could hear me, and I loosened one of the doors, and it fell on my head, and a giant screw tore open my scalp. And there was blood everywhere, and now I was really mad. And I really went upstairs and said, "Now, basically, see what you've done." And my dad took a look at it and said, yep, put a towel on it, we'll get you to the hospital, get that sewn up, and really stop it. Just do what you're asked. That's somewhat what we're hearing from all three readings today, from Habakkuk, from Paul himself in his letter to Timothy, and Luke telling us what Jesus has to say about this whole question of faith and how we live our life. Habakkuk is responding or telling the people of his day what God has to say about their deep concern now about what's happening to them. Babylon is at the door. They know they're about to be deconstructed as a nation and sent into exile. And they are talking about, "Lord, why don't you understand? Don't you see the oppression? When is this all going to go away?" And God simply says, it will come. The end is already determined. Yours isn't to worry about the hardships you may endure along the way. Yours isn't to try to figure out why they're happening or when they're going to stop. Yours is about how you respond to it. See, he whose soul is not at rights, but the upright man will live by his faithfulness. You're worried about what's happening to you. God is saying, I am worried about how you live your life. And through good times and through bad, through thick and thin, to be faithful to God. We know this passage as it is cited several times in the Pauline Corpus by St. Paul, where because of a trick of translation, the upright man will live by his faithfulness, has become in Paul, we walk by faith. So faithfulness becomes more of a noun than an action or an activity. And we know Luther takes it and moves it to faith alone. All of which may be arguably understandable and a decent translation, but what's lost is God is not talking about our faith in God. He's talking about how we live it. The upright person lives by his or her faithfulness. In Luke today, the apostles are talking about faith as well. They've already begun to experience the difficulties of being a disciple and the challenges. And they say, increase our faith. And Jesus' response is very similar to Habakkuk. If you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, anything could happen. Then he goes on and starts talking of what is expected of them. Don't worry about the size of your faith. Worry about how you live your life. For even the smallest amount of faith can do anything. And you've been called to live a life of goodness and holiness and service to others. Do it. That's what you should be worried about. And that when we're asked to do something, we don't expect to be thanked. We do it because it's the right thing to do. We do it because it's who we are. And that's exactly what St. Paul is talking about. He is writing to a group of people who know what persecution means. Bear the hardships that come your way for the sake of the good news, relying on the power of God. Keep as your pattern the sound teaching you've heard from me in the faith and love that are in Jesus Christ. Each of us in our life are faced with challenges and hardships and difficulties, and we can spend our lives stomping our feet and making sounds and saying, "Why, Lord, why me? Why is this hardship brought down upon me?" Or we can say, "Okay, Lord, here we go." And we can put our trust on his strength. And we can allow the quality, not the quantity of our faith, to transform our lives and the lives of those around us. It is the witness of saints, the witness of others before us that often give us courage. One need only look at Maximilian Kolbe, who during World War II in a prison camp allowed and begged for someone else to go free, and he himself endured suffering and torture and starvation and death simply because he was called to witness to love. Also in World War II, an Austrian peasant, 4 little girls at home, Franz Jägerstätter, refused to serve in the the German Wehrmacht, mostly because he, as a conscientious objector, believed he couldn't fight and kill another human being because of his Catholic faith, but also because of the atrocities being committed by the Nazis. Willing to serve as a medic, they executed him. And then the punishment went on for decades as the Austrian people never really noticed him or understood who he was until almost really the 21st century, when they began to hold up this example of someone who lived their faith. But those are the big examples. We know in our lives there's so many others, and it's not just in those huge moments that we're called to be faithful and to live out our faithfulness. It's when in a work situation you do what is right, though it is unpopular, and hold up the following of the rules rather than cutting corners. It is in those situations when it would be easier to allow somebody, not just at school with children, but somebody in your space who's being bullied in some way, when you stand up, though it's unpopular, and you yourself might get tormented. It's the love of a parent who does day in and day out those things parents do. Cooking without Thanksgiving. How many times when I was a kid, after my mom cooked all day long, or my dad on the weekends, did we come rushing in, sit down, eat, and leave without even saying thank you? Now, she could have stomped her feet. He could have thrown his oven mitts at the wall and said, "What about my thanks?" But instead they went to bed and got up and did it again the next day. Living that reality of true love and faithfulness to those commitments they have made. That doesn't mean we don't give thanks. That doesn't mean that when someone who works for us or is doing just what's expected does those things, we don't actually go out of our way to give them some honor and some praise. But it does mean, for those of us engaged in the Christian journey, that we shouldn't expect it. We do what we do because it is right. We do what we do because our faith calls us there. We don't need necessarily an increase of faith. We need to put what little faith we have at the service of God, at the service of love, and at the service of one another.